Warm greetings. Welcome to Wednesdays for Water. We are a citizens collective aiming to walk and talk water. We try to meet every week and connect people with various water worries and wisdoms. And in the process, we wish to curate future water warriors. The way we talk about trivial things for hours, water too needs walking and talking to address the rising water distresses. The way Wednesdays for Water is conceptualized as a prime time show, it wishes to make water everybody's business. The idea of the series was conceptualized in August 2020, and by the end of the year, the team and the structure was pretty much in shape. We started in April 2021 with Dr. Rajendra Singh's inaugural speech. We wish to bring science and society together, and therefore we try to bring in every session either a policymaker or practitioner and a researcher or academician. We also think that future generation is crucial and therefore they have presence in each session. We are going stronger with every week now with session on either quiz, couple of weeks of hard talks and a week of soft session of art and music. There is a simple structure for each session of quiz, hard session and soft session which are moderated by the core team member. Here is a glimpse of what we call as hard sessions and soft sessions. Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to one more session of Wednesdays for Water. We are going stronger with every Wednesday, and I really feel great about it with my team. And we want to thank you for joining. Some of you are rejoining us, and some of you are new to this series. So I would like to give a brief introduction of what we do. So every Wednesday at 5 p.m. We meet to discuss some water subject. And the subject ranges from water fronts to water pollution to, art and music to convey water activism to gender and water. And we try to bring in people from all over the country to talk about water. And the focus is mainly on the youth. So we always have a youth discussion, except today and some weeks when we are having these sessions on, soft sessions, we call them, when we invite artists and people like storyteller we have today as Gauri. So usually in other sessions, we have a discussant who is asking questions to the experts, and we define experts in 4 ways. One who is from academics or from research, and one who is from practice, or we can say from the official organizations who are dealing with water matters. So usually they are talking and the discussant is having queries and questions. So every Wednesday we come at this time and we take up these topics. And we are into our 6th month now, and we are hoping to really go further and on with never ending talking about water, and the subjects are also never ending in water. So with these lines, I would like to introduce today's session as we talk about the tales from the Waterworlds. And before we start, really, we want to have a conversation with all of you. And if somebody wants to chip in any water memories you have or any story you would like to share about water with us, anybody from the present participation. I would not like to take the names, but people may just get started, unmute themselves and start. Maybe Bibhu, you are unmuted. So you have a long story probably, and you have to shorten it.
Yeah, maybe yes. I think it's better if you start with our participants.
Okay,
yes,
sure.
I would like to hear from.
Yeah, yeah, I'm also very keen, but I think warming up has to happen from our end. So I will still wait to introduce Shubhra. Maybe I just go get, you a story from my end, because I am totally soaked in water, I would say, for so many years now, 25 years, but the journey is really 45 years old. So I would like to share a small story from my childhood, a very naughty life going around these ponds and, farmlands. and just jumping around from trees to trees with, I still remember those boys I was always playing with, Babun, Chotka, Bipul, and the funniest was Poncha. I don't know why somebody would like to call their boy a Poncha. Anyway, those boys and I was always playing. I never felt that they were boys and I was a girl playing with them all the time. And the first thing my grandmother Nani ji would do when I return home with everything, all mud around and all, she will just take those two red chilies and some sarso and burn it and just go around my body. And I just could understand until I was really able to ask her, what is this? And she will say, you are so naughty. You go every house, eat anything around. So I have to make sure that aapki nazar utar jaye. So I'm just converting it into Hindi or English. But the best part was really going around those water bodies. I still remember those date palm trees hanging over the ponds, and those boys used to jump from those trees into the pond. And I also dared to do that. I don't remember, realize that I can be so daring now. I'm not that daring as of now, but those days I did that. And I think those were my fondest memories. And my Nani had long hair up to the knee, and she used to just take the mud from those ponds and wash her body and her hair and just return very clean. And if I am doing the same thing with all those mud, my Nani is not happy about it. I just couldn't make the difference why she was clean after using the same mud and I was unclean after that. Probably because I was not bathing, I was just playing in that mud and the water. These memories really stayed in my mind. I have some questions for Gauri, which I will hold because these memories are still so strong in my mind that I always feel that urge to just go and return and be one with that place. I know those boys are men. I know that landscape has changed, but still, I think that urge, I can still remember those smell of those flowers. Raat ki Rani tha, and I don't even remember the names. Jambrul was a fruit near the pond. I don't know what is it called in Hindi or English. And the smell of the soil. You know, you sink in that mud. When you put your feet and all. It was very, very interesting. So I will hold my question for Gauri, but I would like to hear from anyone who would like to share their story. Or we introduce you, Shubhra. What do you suggest, Shubhra?
Yes, you can go. I mean, if anyone else wants to share the story, that would be great. A great way to get introduced as well to all of you, not just this way around. And I also see Gauri has signed in, so perhaps.
Shubhra, any memories from you? Gauri, I will keep you on hold. Thank you so much for joining on time, but we still want to do that little giggling between me and Shubhra. So Shubhra is a dear friend, a professor from CEPT University, Ahmedabad, and also she runs her architectural consultancy and firm as Shubhra Raje. And I know I should not be using that in background of Shubhra, but she's also a daughter of one of my favorite mentors in architecture, and Professor Anant Raje. Shubhra, I really want to hear what you did, something not in your childhood.
Well, it's so interesting. You brought up this theme of clean and dirty. I remember I was probably in college and trying to search for a thesis topic. And eventually my thesis took me somewhere else. But I had this idea of, chalo let's go down one river, at least whether I find a thesis topic or not, at least trip to ho jayega, I'll get a trip out of it. So me and two very dear friends of mine who are now practicing in Rajkot, we went down the Ganges, starting from the source. That time, I think 3 months or something we had given ourselves, from the source to Sundarbans, the Delta. And I remember there are lots of stories along the way, both along the river and also little bit internal, because these were areas actually I had never traveled until that time. UP and Bihar and all were always treated as someplace you have to be careful to go travel. I don't know, people were really hospitable, but even so. But the little story I have actually is when we were in Allahabad. And that time there was no kumbh or anything going on. So the Sangam, the confluence of the three rivers, was a very, very quiet place, because I think it was mid-cycle or whatever. So we went and we asked for one boatman to take us, you know, a little bit inside kind of a thing. And we were in this boat, very thin, long boats. You almost feel you're in the water. The sides of the boat don't overwhelm you, you know, in that sense, you're kind of quite near the water. And we stopped somewhere very quiet. And upstream from us, there was another family that was just sort of, they were doing the visarjan, the ashes into the water. We noticed it, we were looking at it and this and that, and our boatman was in his own world of introducing us to this wonderful world of the Sangam. And at the end of one of his stories about, you know, Ganga, Yamuna, and Saraswati, who's sort of hidden, has vanished, or is hiding or something. He took a little bit of water and gave it to each of us to put it in our, like, you know, the tongue, because you have come to a holy place or something. And I remember the other way, all three of us almost took a step back, because in our mind, we weren't quite in the moment, because we were fascinated by the ash and all that, and all the people in the river spreading the ashes. And we were saying, oh, it's nice to look at, but how can we put the water when it's just coming from there, from through the feet and the bodies of all those people? And that moment of this complete bewilderment on the face of our boatman, saying, but aap jiske liye aaye ho, what you have come for, you're recoiling from that itself. And that moment I'll never forget, that each of us, the way in which we enter a place and what we come there for are so different, but somewhere then they all come together. So, and then of course we all had a laugh and things of that sort. That I remember very, very sort of simply, he said, what you've come for itself, you're recoiling from. So
it's very deep, huh? It's very deep. Also reminds me of Kabir, who said, the river that flows in you flows in me as well.
Exactly.
I think that's a good time to also bring in Gauri in the conversation here. And I would like to first thank Gauri to take out time for us to do this session for Wednesdays for Water for us. I have some queries and questions, as I always do, but I would like to first introduce you to all our participants here today. So Gauri is not only a dear friend, but also a well-known storyteller and an anthropologist who switches between India and United Kingdom, and as well as she's talking about all over the world about different aspects, not only focused on water, but also on other issues, social issues, especially focusing on vulnerable groups. And you know, she is using storytelling as her tool to get into people's hearts, people's mind, and also change the way people look at the world. I recall last time I was looking at her conversation, and by the way, Gauri, last week I also had a chance to go through your conversation of Secret Gardens, and I was like, wow, I have to really read the book before I really look at Gauri, how she's shunting between India and UK. So we will listen from Gauri not only about the lochs of the Highlands, which is the lakes of the Scotlands, but we would also like to listen from you a lot of other water tales, which probably you have been telling people, not only to look at the value of water, but how people really relate themselves in terms of various aspects of water, right from utility, spirituality, and other personal endeavors from water. I do have an urge, and I would like to open the floor to you with this urge. And probably that's also my question, that why is there an urge for people like us who are uprooted from their ground, from their water, to always return to that place and be one with them? So I'm just referring to myself also. Uh, I can smell the air, water, and soil of Gujarat and Ahmedabad, but trust me, 25 years in this land, I still feel, given a moment, I just returned to the place I was referring to. You had not joined then. I was telling my childhood stories. It's a beautiful village called Chandpara in Kolkata. So I leave it here to really ask you this urge. Will it going to end will this urge be fulfilled? Will it end somewhere, or it is something which I have to really do drastically? I don't know. But over to you, Gauri. I really want to hear and see if I can find some answers to my urge. Thank you.
Thank you, Mansi. Thank you, Shubhra, and Mansi. I'm very sorry to everybody. I was a bit late. It's just the way things are. It's so nice to see familiar names crop up. Hello to a few of you that I have met personally. Of course, Mansi, Shubhra, Amrita, and Catalina, and Shreya. Yeah, it's just nice to see familiar names crop up. And what would be nicer, if you're happy to do it, it's entirely up to you, is just for a moment, or maybe for the first story, if you could keep your cameras on. It's nice to see faces. I'm going to urge Mansi also not to put me on speaker mode from the control zone. But I think if some of you want me to be predominant on your screen, I think you know how to do that on Zoom. On your screen, there'll be 3 dots on the right-hand side. And if you pop it there, it'll say speaker view or something, isn't it, Mansi?
Yes, I will not put you on speaker view, Gauri, because I am very much aware of the session we are having today, and it is very interactive. Along with Gauri, I also urge people to keep their video on, because it is going to be talking to you, So I am going to keep it in the palette mode, the grid mode, but people who would like to have more, impact and have a direct conversation with Gauri can do this speaker profile on their screen. So I'm going to keep it as a grid profile, Gauri, just that you know.
Great. Okay, no, that really helps, because today I've got a mix of stories. I was wondering what stories I could bring. So I haven't got like a performance piece. There are times when I prefer to do performance pieces, but times when it's really nice to just, take the temperature of who's arrived and what stories are also arriving in the room. So today I've got a mix of stories from India, some of my favorite water stories from India, and also stories from Scotland, where I live and where I have been researching stories. And let's see how they go and how much time we have for stories. So, all right, to begin, because I caught the fag end of Shubhra's story about the rivers and the beautiful Kabir lines from his poem, and you bringing up the poem Rivers again, Mansi. I'm going to start with a river story. And some of you might know this river story or might not be familiar with it. It comes from Gujarat, where I was born and brought up as well, and my family lives. So for this story, what I'm going to require is a little bit of audience participation, and this is going to be fun. So there's going to be chaos, and hopefully through that we'll find a bit of order. So I've recently come across this word called K-order. So let's see if we can get into the mode of K-order today. In the spirit of new words. So for this story, at a certain point in the story, I'm going to require you to give me a backing track, right? And the backing track is very simple. Since most of you are from India, I'm guessing, or from the subcontinent, it's basically tabla beats. And they go something like this. If you want to switch on your microphone and try it, aloud, that's also good. So they go something like tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak tak tak. That's it, right? And you're going to loop it over and over again, repeat it over and over again till I call you down. Okay, so shall we just try it with the tal and see at what speed we want to go? Yeah, this is so good to have people from the subcontinent, because if I do this here, I have to kind of, go word by word. So I'm like, yes, you guys know, you are maestros. So let's go.
People may unmute themselves. Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to, or you can be in the cocoon of your room and speak it to yourself, listening to the others as well. That's the wonderful thing about Zoom, I've found. It gives you as much privacy as you want. Okay, so ready? 1, 2, 3, go. Tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak tak tak. Yeah? Okay. We're going to do it 3 times, right? So, and it doesn't matter if you go off beat, really, it's fine. And you'll see why in the story. So let's go. 3, 2, 1. Tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak tak tak. Tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak tak tak. Tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak tak tak. Everyone happy? Sortish? Okay, great. I'm getting 2 thumbs ups. Even if I get 1, 2 thumbs up, I'm happy. Okay, so in the story, I will say this rhythm, and as soon as I start, you guys go and just keep going till I do that, which is time out, and then you bring it to a stop. Okay, cool. So we're going to begin with a story which is from the ancient of ancient times, from a time before time, from a time before the Himalayas. Because as all of you know, as far as mountain systems go on the on the subcontinent, the Himalayas, well, they're just kind of babies, or if you want to be a little more charitable, they're like grouchy young teenagers. There are mountains that are way more ancient, way older than that. And you know the mountains I'm talking about. I'm talking about the Vindhyachal, the spine of India that moves from the north to the south, that connects the north to the south. The mountains of the black rock and brown and green forests. The mountains where our most ancient sages lived. And some would say that they are the mountains that are more hallowed, more sacred than the abode of the gods, the Himalayas themselves. So we begin at a time when there were no, or possibly very few humans. It was a time before time, and it was a time when the king of the mountains, Vindhyachal himself, stood proud and strong, towering over the landscape, the desert on the west, the green lands on the east. But Vindhyachal, well, he was looking west at that arid desert landscape. When he looked up, the clouds, there were no clouds in the sky. The sky was clear. It was pristine blue, and sunlight rained down on the land, hard and fast. It was arid. There was not a sound in the air. Who would want to inhabit a land where there is no water? And Vindhyachal, well, over time, this king of the mountains, he began to get lonely. It was like a hunger that grew deep in his dark black belly. And from that hunger came a sharp pain that gnawed and gnawed on his insides. They were eating his insides, and day by day, Vindhyachal's pain grew. It was enormous. Till one day, Vindhyachal couldn't help it. This pain was anything beyond what a black mountain, rock-filled, could take. And Vindhyachal screamed. He screamed into the heavens. I can't tell you for how long or short. Those screams went on and on and on, tearing a fabric in the sky itself. And when that pain subsided, Vindhyachal, tired, exhausted, looked down. Something had taken birth. The king of the mountains did not know that he was going through labor pains, and a child was born, a child that popped out of his belly button, a child that was as black, as dark as him. But you know how it is with children, they're not quite the same as their parents. This child was slightly different. And this child, well, she danced. It was a daughter. And Vindhyachal looked down in wonder, as all new parents do. She was beautiful. She was his life. And he called her Mahi, or Mahi, as some of you know. Mahi, the little stream, tinkled and jumped and sprang over the rocks of her father's home. And she grew up to be a happy child indeed. She gurgled and she burbled, and she sang as she grew older. And there was something about the sweetness of her voice, the sweetness of her scent that carried across the skies. And soon Vindhyachal heard an unusual sound, the twittering of birds. Birds, those curious creatures, flocked to see what new sounds were coming from this arid desert country. And when they saw Mahi, they alighted by her, they played with her. She was generous. She allowed them to bathe in her. And she sang them songs. And soon the birds carried that information far and wide. And they brought little seeds, and trees began to grow on that arid, arid mountain. With the trees came birds and bees flocking, and with them, behind them, came animals of all kinds. There were deer, and there were the cheetah, and then there were the peacocks, and there were the little chidiyas and the crows. All of them came. And soon, Vindhyachal wasn't lonely anymore. His days were filled with sounds. His morning, he awoke to bird song. As he slept, he could hear the gurgling of his daughter as she snored. And soon, time went past. Mahi grew into a young woman, Chanchal, as we call her eyes darting here, there, curious, looking around this kingdom that her father was going to bestow on her. And her father, for his part, brought her up like a warrior. She was a princess, and one day she was going to be queen. And he taught her the arts of governance, that art of being a warrior. He taught her swordplay and arrows and bows and archery, and she grew up to be a quite capable royal princess. Now, one day, Mahi was sitting high up on one of her father's boulders, and from there, she looked out, surveying the kingdom. The sun was beating hard down on the land, and she crinkled her eyes, and there in the distance, she saw something she had not seen before. She saw a twinkling, a glittering that was unlike the desert sand, and she craned her neck further. She reached out to look further, and then she saw a being that was just like her. Little lazier, perhaps, little slower, moved slowly, but moved. Not as fast as the birds and the animals, but moved. And she was drawn to this being. And she went to her father and she asked her father, "Who is that?" The father looked out and, that Mahi is Arab. "Who's Arab?" she said. Arab, he is the sea. He's beautiful. Every day Mahi would go and look at Arab, wanting to get closer, wanting to know more about this being. And you know how it is with longing. You don't know when longing tumbles over into love. And Mahi thought she was in love. In fact, she was as headstrong as her father. And she decided then and there that she was going to marry Arab. And there were no two ways about it. So she went to her father, and like a warrior princess that she was, she said to her father, "Father, I have found my husband. Him, Arab. I am going to marry him." A pang went through Vindhyachal's heart. Nobody likes the idea of their daughter leaving. We know what Viday is. And he looked at his daughter and he said, "Beta, Arab, he's too big for you. He's too far away. He will swallow you up. You will have no identity left. Forget him. There are plenty of other beings, plenty of suitors for the hand of my daughter, a warrior princess who will be queen. But I will marry him," said Mahi, "and only him." And maybe you can say that was the first time that the heavens and time itself saw a battle, the first battle between a father and a daughter. A father stopping his daughter, "You cannot marry Arab," and a daughter saying, "I will marry him. My heart is given to him. He is the man for me." And that battle was tremendous. The heavens roared with the sound of the two arguing, and the father restraining his daughter, and the daughter pushing away, pushing through the rock-hard will of her father, cutting through those rocks as a father screamed in pain, trying to stop his daughter, and her daughter tumbling over those huge boulders and rocks, running as fast as she could, till she was away from her father onto the desert sand, a land she'd never been before, a land that sucked her energies down, but she pushed through that sand, pushing and shoving and hurtling the sand aside, running, not stopping for breath, till she reached the edges of the seashore. Now, you might have guessed that Arab was a sort of, let's say, reflective sort of person, a reflective sort of being. He liked his peace, he liked his quiet, and he was happy with the lap of the sound of his own thoughts, which was suddenly broken by this roar of a being arriving. And Arab, for the first time, looked up out of sheer alarm and curiosity and fear. And as he looked landwards, he saw this being rushing towards him. As he trained his eyes, this being was, and this is what he saw. He saw a being rushing towards him, black, huge, hair flying about, face and body caked with dirt and dust, sweat pouring down, throwing sand around. And Arab wasn't used to such turmoil. He began to retreat, first one step and then further back and further back. And Mahi, well, the more Arab retreated, the more she tried to reach out to him. And the more she rushed and the more she rushed, the more he retreated. If the desert was arid before, now it was a wasteland with the torrent of a flood cutting through it. Till Mahi, she stopped exhausted, panting. She had no more energy left. She didn't even know what the state of her heart was. Was she even in love? Was this love? Was this what it meant to meet the beloved? And she stood there on the seashore, looking out with longing eyes at the man, the being she loved. He had turned his face away from her. And in that moment, something sparked. No one turns their back to me, she said. No one. I will come back and you will look into my true face. And she broke into sobs, crying, teary, all the way back home. Because what do you do when your lover rejects you? You go back to the only home you know. And there was her father nursing his own wounds, licking them, and there was his daughter returning. It was a tearful reunion. The father hugged his daughter and he said, "Don't worry, Mahi, don't worry." And then he said something that probably he shouldn't have. Those three little words. "Mahi, I told you so." Mahi gasped, her breath going inwards. "Beta, there are plenty of other fish in the sea, but I told you, Arab is not meant for you." Mahi looked deep into her father's eyes. And she said, "Father, I want something from you. You have taught me to be a warrior princess. I forgot myself. I want to take up, show the world your training. Will you give me your army?" There was something in those black, dark eyes that Arab, that Vindhyachal couldn't deny. His daughter had grown up. "Yes," he said, "take my army." And so it was that a procession started. This time, the warrior princess in full gear, in her full shining being, her hair combed black and oiled, her long black hair coiled into a bun, her skin rubbed with honey, shining, sparkling, a gold breastplate. and clothes of silk. She walked with a bow and arrow and a sword by her side. And behind her came the army of a mountain, an army of rocks. And the rocks were jubilant. They were following their princess, and they began a chant. They hopped and skipped behind her, drumming a beat on that desert land. And that beat, you know that beat, I know that beat, and that beat rang across the heavens. Tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak tak tak. Tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak tak tak. Can I hear the beat?
Dinadin, tak dinadin, tak dinadin, tak tak tak.
Tak dinadin, tak dinadin. On and on they went. Slowly this time, not rushing, carrying on. Tak dinadin, the rocks, there were big rocks that lumbered down. There were tiny rocks that were skipping with a faster beat. There were rocks that were slightly out of beat as well. But as they went, creating a celebratory, happy sound across the heavens, the animals joined in, the birds joined in. And as Mahi saw her old companions along with her, her hair began to uncoil gently this time, unfolding onto the land, nourishing the land with the black waters that dripped from her hair as she walked down. Trees sprang up on the side. Beings began to build habitation, and the desert land became moist, receiving every step of this river goddess, for that's what she was. And this time, she didn't have to create any sound and fury. As she arrived on the seashore, Arab heard strange music, music he had never heard before. And this time, he turned around and turned his face towards the land, and he saw a queen. He saw a queen in whose wake the land was nourished. And Arab, he smiled in spite of himself, and he reached out his hand. And Mahi, she smiled, and she put her hand in his. And they were married. And you know, and I know, we all from the Indian subcontinent know that the delta where the river meets the sea is one of the most fertile parts of Gujarat today, where they grow cotton, there is black soil, they grow wheat. And us, the children of Mahi and Arab, we live in relative contentment. And that's the story of the river goddess Mahi.
Shubhra, are you still there or you are in the delta?
Transported.
Transported. Thank you, Gauri. We
You're
are
very
speaking
welcome.
with you through the delta, but I see some hands raised. So
Yeah.
if, for a short interaction with people, we can take them. Or Shubhra, you want to add something to it before we take the people?
No, let people sort of converse with Gauri, really. We can,
Yeah. Okay,
we can let
Lavanya
them do that.
or Catalina.
You can
And
unmute
Bhar.
yourselves, guys, and just ask the questions. There's no need to
Yes.
put it in the chat. I think
Yeah.
the
Yes.
order is the day, order of the day.
Key order. I like that word. Huh? I also had question on is that longing for love will still be there even if they got married. So anyway,
That's another story. I'll just say thank you, Catalina. See you. She's just sent a message.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, the bit that I've told you is part of a smaller chunk of a larger myth. This chunk is called the marriage of Mahi, but it's a much longer origin story. So yeah.
Thank you. Lavanya
Yeah.
or Amrita, you want to go?
Ma'am, I put a
Sure.
clap
Please go ahead.
emoji. I have put clap emoji.
Oh,
What?
Lavanya says she was just applauding this.
Okay, she was applauding. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Anybody would like to add, or is it still flowing with Mahi to the Arabs, or you have to come back, huh? Tak din, huh?
Or are you ready for the next story? And, you know, we
Yes.
can do a quick flying over the 7 seas going to Scotland.
Yes, please. But I was just, so people were actually clapping and I thought they are asking questions. So maybe Gauri, we go with you to Scotland, the Lochlands.
Yeah, I think it'll be much better. Yeah, it's Bibhu. Yes.
Yes. I think in this, like, I mean, this love story of Mahi and Arab, people are villains and we are trying to obstruct the flow and, like, I mean, trying our best not the love story to go on, right? So
We have to get the
Yeah,
dance.
absolutely. Where does the story go after the marriage and after the children? And today,
Longing for
yes.
love. You know, I
Yes.
see those dams to be the villains. And the other day I was talking about Aviral Ganga. That is the motto of let the Ganga flow. You know, and then from Tehri to also. Anyway,
Yeah.
we can talk about the villains some other time. We are really in good mood to get soaked in love, more love. So Gauri, we go to you again and fly with you or
Okay.
flow with you to Scotland. I will say, not fly this time. Shubhra, you want to add something?
Let her continue. We
Okay.
can then sort of have a conversation at the end.
Sure.
So given that we are on the Arabian Sea, we know just how busy the Arabian Sea is with routes connecting the east to the west. And we're going up the Arabian Sea. Maybe this time we'll go through the Suez Canal into the Mediterranean, all the way up to what are called the British Isles. And the story I bring you is a story from old Britain, from a time when it was called the Kingdom of Logres and not England. And this kingdom was the kingdom of the Fisher King. The Fisher King, who was a king in whose time there was abundance in these lands, on these islands. There was bountiful food. The land was nourished and was giving food that in turn nourished the beings who lived on this land. Us people, birds, bees, plants, animals. There were birds like the falcons and the hawks and the sparrowhawks and little robins. There were animals that strode majestically over these green lands. The wolf, the badger, the bear, and that divine animal, the fox, the flame-colored flickering fox. But what really held the land together, what provided the life blood through the veins of this land were the wells. The holy wells, they were called, wells that were dotted across the kingdom of Logres. And in the wells sprang and sprouted the waters from the other worlds. And these other world waters nourished the land from below, just as the rain nourished it from above. And during the time of the kings, the old kings, a pact was struck. It was the task of the kings of the land to care for the soil. For if they cared for the soil would care for them. And the wells? Well, the wells were under the guardianship of the women. The women who were called the voices of the wells. They were women from the other worlds in the service of the waters of the other world and the upkeep of these wells. And they had one more duty. Any traveler who passed by the well, any person in need of water, of food, anyone with hunger and with thirst, the women of the well would feed them, offer them hospitality, if asked for, with courtesy. Courtesy was abundant in the land, just as the beings were. And that was the currency of exchange. Now it is said that one time there was a king, a new king, who was sort of, fancied himself as bringing change. He was a modernizer. His name was King Amangons. And King Amangons, well, he thought, courtesies were a bit of old-fashioned, unnecessary ornamentation. What was the need for courtesy? And he ruled the land. He ruled the land like a protector. But one day, when he was passing by one of the wells, a woman stepped forward from the wells. And like he knew, as people in his army did, as soldiers in his army did, she offered him hospitality. She offered him food. She offered him drink. And King Amangons was well pleased. He didn't even have to ask for it. It was given. Of course it was given. He was the king. And he drank deeply of those nourishing waters of the other world. He ate to satisfy his hunger. And then there was a new hunger. And as he looked at this woman, a thought came to him. He owned the land. He owned all beings on it. He owned that woman. And so he did. It was a violation that was fully public. Every one of his soldiers saw that violation. And when he was done, King Amangons captured the maiden and took her with him to his court to serve him for the rest of his days. The soldiers of the army, well, they saw what their king had done. Maybe this was the new law of the land, they thought. And there was a pillage of all the maidens across the wells of the land. Their screams rent through the air and served as a warning to the maidens in the wells far beyond. And those maidens disappeared. They withdrew into the wells, into the other world. The wells now were without guardians, were without custodians. And as the women of the well retreated into the other world, bit by bit, month by month, year by year, eon by eon, so did the sacred waters of the other world. We find the land now green, but rapidly turning into a wasteland. The court of the Fisher King, the one who provided the bounty, who provided the abundance and the riches, disappeared. No one knows where. Some say he has retreated behind a veil, and others say he's gone into a deep slumber underground where the earth holds and protects him. And for those who realize this, will also begin to realize that we need to sound the music and to sound stories that will awaken the Fisher King and sound the call to the maidens to return to this world and connect us to the other world and its waters once more.
Okay. Shubhra, I'm waiting for you.
Thank you, Gauri. I think they were both, in each case, I think one of the things that, of course, the stories talk of love, but it's basically the interconnectedness of everything and the capacity of all these things that we are a part of, whether they are water princesses or guardians of the well, the soil, as you mentioned. There is a generosity, but you use the word exhaustion somewhere. That every relationship also needs that care. It is not one over the other, it seemed to me through these stories, but it is that graciousness with which we are dependent on each other, that dependency, so that nobody becomes precious, but nobody also becomes ignored or taken for granted. That's what your wonderful stories, and in a sense, beginning to relate to everything around us through the emotions we understand, allows us to, in a way, relink ourselves with the world. And that exhaustion was so front and center, whether it was the story of Mahi or whether it was in a different way, the maidens violated and just getting exhausted of bearing any longer the relationship. So it's a wonderful way to reorient to relationships. And yeah, so I just like to sort of, to me, these stories become, and storytelling becomes so important just to remind ourselves of what we are a part of. Then each one can continue to do what we have to do through our disciplines, through our practices, etc. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that reflection. And absolutely, I'd just like to add that what I love about these stories is I haven't changed them at all to, suit the contemporary period. So for me, what is illustrative is what we are facing now, civilizationally, the questions and the issues, they're not new. They're as old as, the beings have existed on this planet. And part of the labor of life, and that's what these stories remind us, that part of the labor of life is to continuously gauge as we move through life, where is the connectedness? Are we upending that connectedness in some way? It's not a particular generation that is a villain. A generation that is a villain is the one that doesn't heed to listen to the land, to listen to the waters, to listen to the stories, because the stories, these are ancient stories, and they're saying essentially the same things that we're talking about now in terms of conservation, in terms of, more than conservation, regeneration, our role, the importance of our inaction sometimes, rather than, always moving into action. That's what Mahi's story to me is about, is when you just rush into it with the idea that, I want to take action, what you're longing for moves further away. Instead, if you focus of coming into the best of yourself and the best of your potential, there will be a meeting somewhere. So there's something really interesting about these stories for me. Yeah.
Absolutely. More I think, Shubhra, what I when I hear Gauri, I always feel that, learning without loving what you are learning is not, it's not complete ever. I know storytelling is a very intricate art, and we have to take, especially for people like me, it will take the entire life to learn how to do storytelling. But if we can really understand these ancient stories with people like Gauri who are trying to tell us, there is a message, and she rightly said that we are still struggling with the same issues which was there then. But when we hear these kind of stories, one thing which comes out very clear is the empathy. Whether it is from Krishna's time when the Kali Nag was talked about, it was very much referring to the Yamuna River being polluted in that manner. And also Krishna moving from Mathura to Dwarka was also the result of the water disaster which happened in Mathura and things like that. So I personally feel that when we are talking about, water or any other form of being or nature, including human beings, without empathy, without love, we are actually not having a complete conversation, even with ourselves for that matter. So it's always pleasure to listen to you in that manner. I have all my shivers on. I'm just trying to just content myself listening to you, and I wish I can continue listening to you all over. But we will take some points and suggestions or some stories from people if they want to share or add on to what you were talking about, and how do they feel about it.
Yeah, if anyone has any thoughts to share or any questions, or if you want to listen to another story, just pop up and tell us.
Yeah. Yes, Amrita, please unmute yourself.
Hi, yeah, it was lovely stories. Very, very nice. Thank you so much. I just wondered, what do you think what is the gender connection? Water is always so feminine. Is it just the fact that it gives life and then women are creators and procreators? Do you think is it correct, or is it just that these two stories are more feminine, but water is not necessarily feminine in that sense?
No, water is not necessarily feminine. These are two of the most ancient stories I could find. There is in the story world, primarily a lot of stories around rivers, you'll find associations with the feminine gender. But I like to think of, the whole question of the feminine and the masculine is more than the woman and the man. It's about a certain kind of fluidity, a certain kind of energy that the feminine embodies, rather than the function of the feminine as procreation. It's the energy that it embodies that I think river stories follow. Having said that, I mean, you also find stories where you will find the nurturing masculine, which are water stories. There are stories, especially in Scotland, where water creatures, the guardians of the waters, are masculine, for instance. You will find the flip side where the feminine can go berserk, the waters can go berserk, or the land can go berserk, and then the masculine in the water has to come out to kind of, hold it, to create a container so that there is not wanton destruction. So the question of the masculine and feminine goes a little deeper than just the direct congruence with female as procreation and male as like the hunter-gatherer, the hunter and the gatherer kind of divide. It's a little more than that. Yeah.
You
It was
also notice,
interesting.
sorry, Shubhra, yeah.
Oh no, it was interesting in that context that Arab, the sea, and
Yeah,
the
I was
sea
about
is
to say
quite
that.
often
It was
male.
he in your conversation, Arab was a he. In fact, I had this question that often we know, at least in India, that as Amrita rightly noted, that is it a feminine thing? And actually, for the first time, I am hearing Arab to be masculine, or probably, yeah, the way you were referring to it was like a male. This is the first time I hear a water body to be a male. Probably I also have to learn a little bit more. Are these seas and oceans referred as male in the historic literature? How are they referred? I know for sure that lakes, ponds, rivers, peatlands, marshlands are all she in the ancient references. But I really didn't take notice of the seas and oceans, and good.
Yeah, I could only think of Poseidon and Greek and Roman association with the ocean and the sea as but of course there are other goddesses which are made. But this relationship between river and sea reminded me of, I was recently watching a documentary on the various falls of civilization. More often than not these days, it seems they are associated with, again, the changing relationship of the land with water. One will more than wars and other attributes we might have associated them with. But in Mesopotamia, it was very different. The sea started coming further inland with its salt. And your story was making me think, I wonder what the Sumerians must have, thought of that reverse process. Because that's the other wonderful thing about the earth,
I'll definitely look at that. I just want to kind of point out, Bibu has a few comments in the chat where he says, isn't Brahmaputra referred to as male in stories? Absolutely, Bibu. Thank you for bringing that up. And he says, ocean is male in mythology, like God Varun. There's something I want to say about the relationship between the gender of the gods that are associated with the oceans. I think I'll have to look a little bit more closely at Hindu mythology, so I can't claim to speak for Hindu mythology here, but in Celtic mythology and Greek mythology, although you have male gods associated with oceans, the oceans are a little more complex than that, because you also have, like in Greek mythology, you have Thetis. Shubhra knows about it because of a workshop we did. And Thetis is the goddess of the ocean. So you don't just have singular gods. A lot of similarly with Celtic mythology, you have Manannán Mac Lir, who is the sea god, but alongside you also have the Cailleach, the old woman who creates the ocean and who kind of becomes the ocean in some ways as well. So among the Western Canadian Native Indians, I would say, I forget which tribe, but there you have the goddess of the oceans, who if she is not honored and fed, will throw a tantrum and create storms, and then people have nothing to eat because the ocean also provides them the food. So the work of the shamans there is to keep the ocean goddess honored and placated. And the way they have to do it in the story is they have to go deep into the ocean and comb her hair and get the carbuncles and the sea lice out of her hair once a year. So, you know, it's kind of, there is a lot of, there is a little bit of a complexity as far as oceans and relationship with the masculine go. It's not always that one-to-one. Again, there are layers. And yeah.
Now I get curious with Bibhu's point, because if Brahmaputra's story has to come, and because I am rooted around this longing for love, I am just wondering that Brahmaputra comes and gets into Sundarban. What is his longing, you know, to come to the bay? How would you really see that, Gauri?
What? Sorry, could you repeat that? I was just.
I'm saying that Brahmaputra also referred as a male river, because Bibhu also raised it, and it was out of my memory for a short time. I'm just wondering if Brahmaputra's story has to be told, how would you really refer to Brahmaputra and his longing for love? Because we know it's also very, bold river. Even as of today, I wonder if you have ever really talked about Brahmaputra in the past, or would you like to talk about it?
I haven't, but this conversation here has kind of really sparked something. So I will be looking at it. And I mean, who is to say that, you know, a male river doesn't have longings?
Yeah, I'm sure. That's why I'm saying,
what does the male river long for?
Yeah, and we have to see the Sundarban at the convergence of it.
And how does that energy of longing manifest itself? I think that's what's interesting for me, rather than whether particular attributes are associated with particular beings. Yeah, I mean, that's anthropomorphizing things a little bit too much, but it's about how, when we talk about male energies and female energies, it's about how are they manifesting, how are they expressing themselves. So, but there might be something really interesting there, because Brahmaputra is a mighty, mighty river, isn't it? It's like Shiva. And with Shiva, you have Ardhanarishwar also, you know, it's Shiva is not just a male god. there are.
Yeah, that's also very interesting when we take up Shiva as a discussion. There's an interesting point raised by Venks Vinayak. Would you like to elaborate a little bit more on that? Or you want me to read it? Or Gauri, are you seeing the chat box? Maybe reflect on it.
Yeah, I know that he says in Celtic mythology, there's a story of a separation of ocean with the river. I don't know this one, so I would be really happy if you could kind of, you know, tell us a little bit. You don't have to tell the story, but just, you know, what the story is about or where is it from, because I would really like to look at it.
Venks, would you like to add something?
Actually, I read when I was in Wales, I picked up a book, and there was this story of separation, you know, during the making of the river systems and the plains. The story was that my clay got separated from your water. And in this separation came up the dry phase or the drying phase, where a lot of, the different plants and animals also started coming on the, floodplain, which was dry that time. So there were many such stories I was relating to the drying phase of the river. In that longingness also, there is this desire to have this dry phase, which is also considered as productive for the upcoming of the new plants and animals. And sometimes the river would just be so small that animals could cross and breed, go to the other part of the mountains. So I don't remember the exact title of the book because that was almost like 15 years back, but that story was quite powerful, you know, that during my clay got separated from your clay and water, and we try to meet and make the circle of life, the river and the ocean.
Okay. I will definitely look for it. Um, there's something quite interesting also. The reason why I chose these two stories particularly is because I found them to be very, very local. And I'm very interested in the relationship between story locality and its resonance. There is something that is when stories become like huge, sometimes that which you were talking about, Vinayak, that in this case the river that separates from the ocean, my clay from your clay, uh, gets separated and new life begins. There's something very particular in that locality of Wales as well that will have given birth to the stories. The stories of, the birth of land where I live in Western Scotland has to do with an old woman who is Mother Nature herself, walking up and down with rocks in her apron. And every time she trips in the ocean, a rock falls out and an island is formed. So locality also affects the imagination of uh, ecology. Think, and I find that fascinating. I will definitely look up the Welsh story that you're talking about. And both these, the Welsh as well as the Scottish, would be within the realm of what we would call Celtic mythology. But it's like somebody said, tributaries feeding the ocean.
I think this imagination of ecology is just so relevant today. I don't know if Mansi, you face it, or the participants today face it, but in those of us working in the built environment, the imagination of any water body, I sometimes like to call it what a body, is always blue and is fixed. And that begins to have repercussions on how we treat our own abundances and lives, or how we tend to define our own sense of abundance and paucity, just like clean and dirty, how we began with initially, yes. Mansi, to give the example of a river which is dry begins to get associated with paucity when looked on just as a moment. But when looked on as the annual cycle, there is no such thing. And of course, talking about Ahmedabad and its treatment of its river and changing its nature completely. But in general, the idea of it's almost like the character of a person gets fixed to one aspect of their entire being. The same way our relationship and our engagement, our imagination with the world around us also begins to do that. So water is for this, something else is for this, and to have that imagination, to engage with it in different ways. And perhaps that's such a wonderful way of looking at the local in one's practice, not just as drawing borders or separation, but to be able to look at something with an intimacy. So a different way of even defining or imagining local. So yeah, thank you for that. That was quite wonderful.
I think it's a very valid point, because those imaginations have actually turned into prejudices for us. The way we look at, and referring to Ganga here now, because I'm recently getting involved slowly and slowly. When we talk about Gangotri to Ganga Sagar, we are actually not talking about a water only flowing from here and there, It's the whole cultural connection over years and years, which we even can't count how many years we are talking about. So it's whether it is Mahi or Ganga, or whether it is Narmada, all these water bodies, we have a very different notion now. and probably Gauri may be able to answer that. Is it because that the way they were described mythologically it has not evolved with time, or we have misinterpreted or misunderstood them in the current context? Because today river means river front, and today water means for consumption. The very fact, the way you were explaining Mahi to be a being, Arab to be a being, then the conversation, of course, extended to being he or she, but you were very much talking about they being, and I think this is something which we are also as scholars now we are talking about in the legal and scientific world, that they need a status of being, which was mythologically there. Somewhere in last few decades, I will say, or a century probably, we started forgetting the fact that that we are also water, but then they are also being just like we are being,
I
Do
think
you
the only
see there
thought
is
that
something
comes
about
to,
it, the way it is written, that we are misinterpreting its being?
yeah, I think the only thing that comes to mind is, when I tell a story about something, whether it's a table or a chair or a river or,
Yes.
a mountain, um, I have to believe truly for myself that it is a being. Otherwise, I can't tell a
Yes,
story.
that is true, but it
No,
is also
otherwise, I'm telling a story about an object. It becomes a very
yes.
different story.
Yeah, that's a very valid
So
point. As you as a storyteller, but what I was trying to ask you is that this whole being of water, water cannot be an object. First of all, then we are also object.
yeah,
If water is
yeah,
object, we are also object, and probably that's where we are having problems today in the society. But if we start looking at it as something living with life, who can love, who can long for something, I think we also change our perception about even ourselves and life, and not only about rivers. Yes, Bibu, please add.
Yes, because we're talking about this being. My field work in like villages, remote areas, tribal and non-tribal communities. You hardly find anything, right? Any other natural object. It could be a mountain, small stream, it could be a pond. Ponds are, I'm not sure, like it may not be the case, but particularly streams, mountains, hillocks, trees, everything considered as like being. It has a name. We like in our official records, like that name might not have entered, for different reasons. In fact, the names of the individuals living in those areas are also not entered, or entered the way officials wanted it to be entered, not like what name these people carry. So similarly, many of these resources, particularly I'm referring to these streams, hills, and all kinds of resources, natural resources around them, got names and also have stories around them, right? I remember I was born and brought up in a village. The trees, for instance, are considered as beings. The marriages happen like sometimes, these banyan tree and people tree. Like if you want to be friends, we plant. Me and my friend plant a banyan tree, and then we got them married. So then, then we became some, what they call it, like summon these, right, or whatever. I do not know the Hindi word for this. So these being and the humans getting married to boys and girls both getting married to a specific tree if they have some dosage or something like thing there. So such entities are being considered as beings. I think like there are many trees, for instance, which are sacred groves, have some stories around them. I remember our children, our grandma stories, or whoever told us stories, have lots of such natural beings around them. It's not the distant element like the Ganga, how it came to the earth, but also the immediate, the ones which is there in our immediate surrounding, right? Some delta, how the delta got formed, or so many such stories. These natural elements are very much part. I think that is true for other parts of the world as well. It's not just something unique to India, but other parts of the world as well.
Absolutely. I think when you name something, you are giving it life. um, when you call something, um, even the act of naming, it's something that fascinates me. But there's one way which is about you name something which is based on your will and your whimsy. But then there is a whole other way of naming, which is listening out for what it's telling you it wants to be named as. And that doesn't apply just to kind of more than human beings. There are anthropological studies of favelas in Brazil, where there is a whole phenomenon of a child not being named till the child turns about 5. And to the mother, it indicates that the child has the will to live. It's a harsh place to live. So the child, through its will to live and survive till the age of 5, will give the family a sense of what does this child want to be named as. So in a sense, the whole aspect of granting an identity, I don't have the word, but yeah, granting a kind of identity to something is about listening out for the identity that's been given, and not the identity that you give, but what is it asking you to acknowledge that it is. And I think stories kind of give these clues, oral stories. I think, and in particular, I will emphasize oral stories here, stories that tend to get lost, that we look at what you were saying, Bibu, local folk stories, not just the mythologies. What enters mythology sometimes is a very distilled version of what is, the real living experience of the connection and the interaction between beings. There's something quite interesting there. Why do villains become villains, in stories? I mean, that's a whole other thing. But
yes, we will have more sessions
we are running out of time, I think. We could go on and on.
Yeah, we can go on and on, but I would like to just see if any last words from Shubhra or you would like to add.
Or anybody in the audience.
Or anybody out there. If you want to add something, we can take it up. And I would like to take this opportunity also to apologize everybody because that we are running late. But I think these conversations are really so sweet that you really want to return to become human rather than staying machine. So given an opportunity, I just want to continue listening and talking, but we have to respect also others' time. Anybody would like to have some last lines for any one of us, or Gauri particularly, or Shubhra? Okay. I don't see any hand raised, so I will offer to Shubhra if you have any last line to say.
No, just thank you, Gauri, Mansi, for inviting, and Gauri, of course, for your stories, the discussions that followed as well. A lot of things to carry ahead. Next time, perhaps, I hope there's a next time. Yes. Gauri, I would love to hear stories about aspects of nature as old and exhausted. The only reason is we are so used to, when we go into the world of stories, sometimes, and especially conversations about our ancient past, from where things come, a tendency to romanticize and not deal with other aspects of even being human.
Yes.
That being human, man or woman, is not only youth. And currently, the state in which we are living and what we are a part of, our world, our ecology, is at a strange position of exhaustion as well. And to not be afraid of it,
yes,
and treat it as something that is part of a cycle of life. Sometimes perhaps this talking about imagination, perhaps we are afraid of it, and therefore we don't know how to engage with it. And it would be lovely at some point to actually have these sort of communions where we actually not just confront, but in some way be present with
Maybe
elderhood
harness,
and,
Shubhra?
or just be with the idea of things also getting exhausted. That word was so powerful, Mahi, just being exhausted.
Yes.
And you're beginning to wonder what that means today. But thank you so much for
Thank you so much.
stories.
And I'd also like to thank Bibu and Vinayak and Amrita, and of course Mansi and Shubhra for helping the session, but all three of you, Amrita, Vinayak and Bibu, for contributing. It's given me food for thought as well. And I'd like to thank everyone who stayed back to listen and give me a little bit of a rapping rhythm. Even if I couldn't hear you, I could feel that everyone was engaged. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I would like to thank again Gauri and Shubhra to really take out time and also enlighten us, apart from taking us to those wonderlands which often we forget that we have to live with love, even if we really are very busy. And these kind of moments are really to remind ourselves that being human is the easiest thing one can do. To love is the easiest thing one can do. And water allows us to do that, to be honest. And interestingly, when we talk about water, we often see it as a distant thing. And I think these kind of sessions really tell us that it is part of us. Where I also started with the point saying that the river that flows in you flows in me. But another important thing, which I never realized, that actually Kabir was so fond of water. And I would like to end with another quote from him, which is, I think, is very, not only mystifying, but it is also deep. So I went looking for him and lost myself. The drop merged with the sea. Who can find it now? So whether we like it or not, whether we accept it or not, we are, I mean, it's not to end with a negative note, but we are water and we are going to merge with it one day. So I look forward to hearing a positive story of exhaustion and with the same rigor and energy. And Shubhra and me are always those inquisitive child and ready with our ears, Gauri. So you can just give us a string and we are ready to listen to you as we were today. So thank you all the participants for attending today's session and staying till the end. And we hope to see you next week. We are talking about, it's a hard session next week, and we take up this conversation of river being he or ocean being she or the other way around, because the next week session is a hard session and we talk about gender and water. And we look at how one who carries the water knows the value of water. And we are focusing on women and how women's life changes with the water system of any particular region. And we really have very good speakers. I hope that you come back next week, same time, 5 o'clock. And please do take care of yourself. And I see you soon. Thank you, everybody. And
Thank you so much,
you,
ma'am.
team.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, presenters, for joining us today and enlightening us with your wisdom. Also, thank you all the participants for joining us and making the session interactive. Besides walking and talking water, worries and wisdoms collectively, we see this as a platform to cross-connect and expand our network and explore possible collaborations. We are also making notes to publish both scientific and non-scientific work. Here is a glimpse of some of our writings. You may reach us through email, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and also look at our website www.w4w.in. We look forward to your suggestions and comments to make the series more meaningful and engaging. And meanwhile, we hope that you appreciate today's session. We represent Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Hyderabad, Terry School of Advanced Studies, New Delhi, Environmental Design Consultants, Ahmedabad, FluxGen Sustainable Technologies, Bangalore, Counterview, and we are supported by Wiki's Water Resources Council. We truly appreciate your support and encouragement in conducting this series, and we hope that you will stay tuned with us through our social media platforms and our website, and you will write to us at our email IDs.